wonderland to get here. Hey, what's going on, ATA? So real quick, how many of y'all would be super disappointed if I did not give a speech? And well, okay, I can't see, but some of y'all remember, how many of y'all were here last year at ATA? I still have PTSD from last year's ATA when I came out and my speech wasn't here. So we're not doing speeches. And two, I've been on the road for the last few days, and I've been to 3 locations, and I figure if it's all right with you, can we just keep it real for the next 50 minutes? Is that cool? I heard General Minahan likes to keep it real, so we're just going to follow that. Hey, real quick, before I get started, though, big thank you to everybody on the ATA team who made this event possible. Big thank you, General Everhard, General Minahan, Chief, all the chiefs and commanders who are here, and big thank you to our civic leaders who are here, industry partners, everybody, family members. Where's the family members? Big thanks to everybody here. Hey, if I can, I want to know who is in the audience, though, real quick. Is there any guard in here? Okay. What about reserve? That's good. Okay. Do I have any defenders in here? I have a few. Okay, good. Medics? Maintainers? Ops? That was a sad hoo back there. Who am I missing? Are there cyber folks in here? LRS type folks? Okay. Who am I missing? I said medics. I said air crew, ops air crew. All right, hey, how many of y'all, if you've been in the Air Force less than 5 years, raise your hands. Just a few. 10, how about 5 to 15 years in the Air Force? Raise your hands. How about over 15 years? Over 20. Oh, I forgot what kind of convention I was at. Over 25. Okay. Over 30. Okay, I'm going to stop counting. So everybody who's been in less than 15 years, you probably need to give a hand clap to the over 20 crowd. So I always appreciate understanding who's in the audience because I always think chronologically, and I think back to when I had an opportunity to join our United States Air Force. And I tell people all the time, I joined it over 30 years ago. I thought my dad told me somewhere that 4 years in the military never hurt anybody, so I thought I'd join 4 quick years, get my GI Bill, and roll out. About the 4-year mark, I re-enlisted to pay off my Honda Civic. And then about the 8-year mark is when I really joined our Air Force, when I really understood what it means to wear our nation's cloth and what an honor it was. And so I think chronologically, so I'll go back to some of that, and the over 30 crowd will all understand kind of where my headspace is, and I think this will be helpful for all of us. But if you've ever heard me talk, you'll typically hear me talk directly about competition. Where are we focused today as a department of the Air Force? And you'll hear me typically talk about China first because China is absolutely our most sophisticated adversary that we have. But if you want to know what's on the minds of your senior leaders, and I understand you had an opportunity to already hear from General Minahan, you had an opportunity to hear virtually from the Secretary of the Air Force, but what's on our hearts and minds right now in the Pentagon is absolutely reoptimization. So what does that really mean, and what are we really talking about? And I know the Secretary kind of alluded to this, but he sent out a memo back in the first week of September that went to the entire force. And if you paid attention to that memo, you would understand that he did not mince his words. And it's not lost on me that when I was Tech Sergeant Joe Bass, that I probably did not read many memos from the Secretary of the Air Force. That I probably would have said, who's a secretary, and I probably would have deleted it. But I'm going to ask every single one of you, and I'm going to ask you to take this back to your teammates. If you have not read the Secretary's memo, dated in the early part of September, I'm going to ask you to go into your deleted folders, and I need you to read it. I'm serious. And I need you to read it not just once, but probably 2 times, maybe even 3 times. I've talked to enough audiences since he penned that memo to know that the majority of the force just glanced it over or didn't even read it. But I need you to really pay attention. If you listen to what the Secretary says, it's pretty telling when he says the Department of the Air Force, both Air and Space Force, are not postured for great power competition. The Department of the Air Force is not postured today for great power competition. And so today, your Department of the Air Force senior leaders across the board are focused on how do we need to make sure that we are re-optimized to be the Air Force that our nation is going to need at any time, anywhere. And so to that end, there's 5 lines of efforts. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but we are taking a holistic look at what we've got to get after. When General Brown got in the seat over 3 years ago, he rolled out his 8-page strategic approach, accelerate, change, or lose. He rolled out 4 action orders, A, B, C, and D. He made them easy: airmen, bureaucracy, competition, design. The action order that I resonated the most with, by the way, is action order D for design implementation. And so essentially, Secretary of the Air Force saying we've got to re-optimize for great power competition. General Brown, previous Chief of Staff, said we have got to get after action order D. That is what we're working on today. If we had a blank sheet of paper and we could re-optimize our force to be the Air Force that our nation needs, what might it look like? And so when I think back to over 30 years ago when I joined, it's such a very different force with very different challenges. Back 30 years ago, you had to be strong in 4 warfighting domains: air, land, and sea. Did I say that right? I think I missed one. Okay, you had to be strong in air, 3 warfighting domains. I didn't have coffee today, by the way, because I flew. But you had to be strong in 3 warfighting domains: air, land, and sea. You had to have strong Army, strong Navy, strong Marine Corps, strong Air Force. And here we are in 2023, almost 2024, and I'd suggest to you we've got to be strong in air, land, sea, space, cyber, and information. And I'd also submit to you that if we lose in any of those 3 last war-fighting domains, by the way, that we probably lose, period. And we can't even generate air power if we lose in space, cyber, and information. And so for the past 30 years, while we've been focused primarily in one AOR, and oh, by the way, we're still focused in that AOR. Many of your teammates are all deployed to that AOR, and oh, by the way, we've extended many of your brothers and sisters who are there right now. And so when you think about what's been going on in the last 30 years and why is the Air Force so focused on, why is the Department of Defense so focused on our most sophisticated adversaries, because they've been moving out fast. And every one of our airmen serving in today's military has to understand that. They have to understand, and every airman and every audience that I talk to has to understand that China's absolutely put a stake in the ground. And they've told us in the year 2049 they will take their rightful stand to become the world dominant power. Every airman needs to know that. If you talk to, are there intel folks in here, by the way? One person. I love it. I'll keep all this on class open source. I didn't ask, are there guardians in here? No space guardians? Hey, I'll keep all this on class open source, but this is, there's a lot that we can say on class open source with respect to China. But when you look at what China's done in the past, well, let me get back to their 100-year marathon, which, by the way, they call their century of humiliation. If you talk to your one intel person back here, what your intel person is probably going to tell you is China's actually ahead of time, 15 to 20 years. You do the math, 2029. I learned that from General Minahan not to say numbers out there. And so, I got love for you, sir. We learn from each other. But what I've learned is it doesn't matter. It's not our jobs to predict when. It's our jobs to be ready today, tomorrow, and into the future. So the Secretary of the Air Force says we are not prioritized for great power competition. What do we have to do? Let me just talk a little bit about China. I don't know if you have an ops intel briefing in here, and certainly most of you are operators, so you get it. But what I'll tell you is what you need, especially to the commanders and the chiefs in here, don't let it be lost on you that the majority of your forces never get an ops intel briefing. Never get an ops intel briefing. Never understand or hear somebody say that China's put a stake in the ground, 2049. And so let me just talk a little bit about that piece. If you look at what they've done in the past 30 years alone and how they've really gotten after their strategic objective, which is to become the world dominant power, and you look at how they've modernized from a military perspective, if you look and see what they've done from a Belt Road Initiative and how they've poured into nations across the globe, across Europe, building railways, building ports, pouring into other nations, giving them loans, into Africa. In fact, China believes that Africa is their second continent. If you've ever deployed to Djibouti, you know that China practically owns Djibouti. You know the influence and perspective that they're pushing into South America. So China's been masterfully getting after their Belt Road Initiative. In the last 8 years alone, they've taken a string of islands in the South China Sea. They've managed to put them together, put a runway on it, places to hide munitions, not because they feel like it, but because they can have reach capability. If you look at what they've done by investing into media outlets across the globe, why would China invest into media outlets across the globe? To control information, control the narrative. If you look at the influence that China has even within our own nation in Hollywood and how we didn't even release Maverick in time because of the influence that they have there, China's absolutely playing the long game. And again, if they can win in space, cyber, or information, they win. So here we are, not short of challenges. That is why it's upon every single one of us to really take seriously what does the Department of the Air Force need to do to make sure that we are optimized for great power competition, and what's that going to look like? What I would say to you is you're probably going to see more change in the next 4 to 6 years than I've seen in my entire 30-year career, and it's about time. One of the things that I'm focused on as your Chief Master in the Air Force is Action Order A. Is all things airmen. And I have a good time in the Pentagon focused on those things because one of the things that I share with all of our staffs are we are not going to be able to onboard and retain the talent that we need in today's Air Force and our future Air Force, the force of the future, with 1990s and 2000s policies. And so we're taking a look at everything. It's always interesting to me when I hear our airmen say, I wonder if the Chief of Staff knows about this. I wonder if Chief Bass knows about this. The answer is yes. We absolutely know the challenges with BAH, with tuition assistance, or whatever it might be. So there is nothing that we are not looking at that is important to you and your families. I promise you that. With that, I really actually want to turn the mic over to you guys so that I can field any questions and find out what's on your minds. Before I do, let me start to get ready to close it out. I want to close it out with saying thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of the 1% who serves in this great nation. Thank you to your family members, your loved ones who support you wearing this uniform. I tell our airmen all the time, I actually don't care how long you serve. I don't care if you just serve 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 28 years. As I mentioned before, I signed up to just do 4. What I ask every single one of our airmen is, I just ask you to make your service better. Make your career feel better. Make your unit better. I think that's fair. What I ask our Air Force to do is to make you better. So that when you take this uniform off, because every single one of us will, that you can go do great things in your hometown. I'll close it out also talking about taking care of you and taking care of those around you. Resiliency, which is something that I know is very important to each and every one of these leaders on the front row. Make sure that you're taking care of you. For those of you who enjoy a good book, a good audible or a good read, if you've ever read Generation Z Unfiltered, actually, how many of y'all have teenagers? You need to read Generation Z Unfiltered. That's a pro tip for you. I read it a few months ago, and I came home, and I told my husband, Ron, I was like, dude, like, we need to change the way we lead. We still have a 17-year-old at home. And when you read this book, it really does in fact, everybody needs to. If you are leading airmen, you need to understand it, because we have to have a deep appreciation for the 5 different generations that are serving in today's workforce. But when we talk about Generation Z and how it applies to me, when I was talking to my husband, I said, we have to change the way that we lead even our own kiddo who's still at home. Because what I learned in that book is Generation Z actually wants to serve. They just want to serve in their own way. And they just want a different pathway, and they want flexibility. What I also learned is Generation Z, the 28 years old, has become what we knew as 18. Adolescence has extended. Kids don't want to drive anymore. Seriously, like, they don't want to get licensed, and that's not true for everybody, right? My daughter wanted her license at 16, but that's not true for everybody. But by and large, kids don't want to drive as young as they did. They don't want to work as young as they did. They don't necessarily experience life as we did. They used to call us, by the way, I'll figure out how to tie this into warfighting at some point, but they used to call us helicopter parents. Y'all remember that? They don't call us helicopter parents anymore. They call us snowplow parents. What's a snowplow parent? It's somebody, for the CE folks in here, who just paves the path and makes sure that there's no bumps in the road and nothing bad happens, right? So I go home and I tell my husband, like, we can't be snowplow, like, we've got to make sure that we change the way we do things. And it's true. They said they don't even date until later in life. So it's true in my household, because my daughter, 17 years old, just got her first boyfriend. I had mine at 8. I don't know it's a little weird for me. So she tells us it's our 3rd month anniversary, and I got to prepare her for life. I can't be that snowplow parent. So I said, girl, don't get excited. It's not going to work out. So I'm preparing her for life. Here's how I'm going to tie it back into resilience and you all. Like, these are the airmen coming in today's Air Force, right? Like, I don't need my kiddo coming in and then you're her supervisor, and for the first time in life, they're experiencing life. When you look at most of the resiliency challenges, by the way, 90% of them relationship issues. 90% of them relationship issues. We have got to teach people, we have got to teach each other about how to deal with life. So with that, pro tip, Generation Z Unfiltered, it will help you be a better parent, it will help you be a better wingman and a teammate to each other. And so with that, I told you I wasn't going to give a speech. I want to just have some real talk. And now I'm going to turn the mics over to you. Do we have mics in the audience? Oh, we don't have mics. So I'm going to turn it over to you all. What I would say to you again, to all the folks here at ATA, to the folks that are online, to all of our mobility teammates, to our Guard and Reserve, by the way, who are the secret sauce in what we do. Thank you for serving. Thanks for being great teammates. Thanks for making our Air Force so great. And with that, I want to hear what's on your minds.
Brian. Sorry, ma'am, we were doing a little admin there, okay. And it's for what happens next, but we're on good shape. So, ma'am, here's how we're going to do this. I am getting questions through a process, and I will go ahead and ask them. We don't have a whole lot yet, but if we run out, then I'll ask members to just come forward.
And they know how to do this?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay, good.
Oh, yes, ma'am, and more importantly, I've learned, and so I know how to do it as well. I even found out, I learned a new term, crowdsourcing. There's a sort of a crowdsourcing function, and all of the youngsters and oldsters that can see the questions, and they can, if they like it, and it pops up to the top of the list. And so I'm just going to.
So here's, General Killer, what you also need to know is they're not shy of opinions, and they share them online. So certainly they're going to share them with us. Okay.
So, ma'am, in order to share, here's the first question.
Okay.
And they're not shy.
Yes.
Ma'am, how are we addressing the rise in mental health cases, specifically that members remain eligible for deployment taskings and reducing the extended wait times for referrals for most of our medical groups, which can be attributed to overworked staffs?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we're looking at. By the way, we started and I think I mentioned this last year, if I didn't, forgive me, but we started a Fortify the Force initiative team. How many of y'all have heard of that? So it's a phenomenal team made by guardians and airmen and family members and veterans, soft community, every kind of community. It's a team of about over 300 people that could bring us challenges and barriers to resiliency and fortifying the force all the way from the grassroots level up. Because what we know about resiliency and mental health challenges, et cetera, is that programs don't help save lives, and top-down programs are not always that helpful. And so we started this Fortify the Force initiative team from the grassroots up, and one of the lines of efforts that they're focused on are what are some of the policies that are not helpful to any of us. And some of those policies are that we would have policies that just automatically cut you out and say you can't deploy. Or we have policies where, here's a true story, we had a senior master sergeant in our formations who his spouse had passed away 10 years ago, and he went and got help. And then 10 years later, he couldn't get an assignment to Florida. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so these are some of those barriers that team has brought to our attention, and we're working with the AOs of those AFIs to help fix some of those barriers. So the policy piece is one thing. The other thing as it relates to the challenges with wait times and mental health, et cetera, another memo that we pushed out that I don't know how many of you guys read it, but myself and General Brown pushed out a memo to the field entitled Spectrum of Resilience. If you hadn't seen it, just check it out. And that was something that myself and General Brown personally, there wasn't a week that went by that we did not talk about the resiliency of the force. Not a week that went by that we did not talk about mental health, and a week that didn't go by that we didn't talk about suicides. And so for me and General Brown, we started talking about why is there such a challenge, and how do we help alleviate some of the pain points with respect to the lack of mental health providers. And so here's just some data points for everybody, and most of you all know this, but our nation is at a shortage of mental health providers, our nation. And so if our nation's short mental health providers, that means the DOD is going to be short mental health providers, that means the Air Force is going to be short mental health providers. But what we've learned talking to our mental health providers is that out of every 10 airmen who comes into mental health, only 2 of them technically need clinical mental health support. The other 8 just needs to know somebody cares. So what we're not short of in the military is leaders and supervisors and wingmen. And so we've got to have some strong NCO development, strong CGO and FGO development, so that we can get to a place where everybody feels cared for. And so we rolled out this spectrum of resilience because there are more things within this spectrum than just I'm healthy and I need to go seek mental health. I am a huge fan, by the way, of comprehensive airman fitness. I'm a big fan of the fact that we have to be focused on our own resilience by focusing on our physical fitness, our mental, our social, our spiritual. If we help build those things up, that might help alleviate some of the friction points there. If we tap into our fellow wingmen and teammates and maybe get off of our phones sometimes and our devices and actually have analog face-to-face leadership, maybe that'll help alleviate some of the friction points where we can't get people in. If we'll tap into the other resources that we have, so there's lots of things that we have to get after, General Kelly, and we're identifying what those things are before we can get to that. And so if you have ideas, we're open to hear them, but I think there's a lot of supporting fires that we can have, but we are focused on how do we fix some of the policies, and then how do we do more. Let me just add one more thing, and we talked about it at Corona as well. I know the CFT is focused on it. I'm a big fan of what we all used to know as HAWCs. Do y'all remember that? Health and Wellness Centers? All the 30 and up remember that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know how we got away from that. And so we're going to get back to a model where we have total force fitness, if you will, kind of centers back at our bases. I don't know what they're going to be called, wellness center or something like that. But we've got to get to a place where our airmen have a place to go, whether you're an Aviano, whether you're at Scott, whether you're a McGuire, you have a place to go that has a total force fitness. And how about we get left of the situation and we have exercise physiologists there, and we have other things that build up our airmen to the core. That is where we're going to go at some point. Thank you.
Ma'am, the next most popular question is Chief Bass. What are we doing to address the recruiting and retention issues that are facing our Air Force? Is there anything you can share perhaps about upcoming changes in things like dress and appearance or new uniforms?
I don't know.
Or I could go to the next.
Thanks for the question. I don't know that dress and appearance and new uniforms is why people are not coming into the military or not. But y'all tell me. I don't necessarily think that's it. I think that's kind of two separate questions. But I actually do want to touch on the recruiting thing. You know, just again, a data point. I talk to a lot of leaders across our nation, whether they're from industry or whether, you know, they're CEOs or wherever. Like the recruiting challenges in our military are recruiting challenges across the nation. Everybody is struggling to hire a workforce. Just know that. The Department of Labor, in fact, called my office before the school year to ask how many airmen do we have that have commercial driver's license. What they really want to know, General O, is how many guard airmen do we have with commercial driver's license. Why? We didn't have enough school bus drivers. And so the recruiting challenges really felt across the nation. I will tell you that today we are in a really good place, and I've got ATC commander looking at me, but today we're in a way better place than we were last year. And we think we're going to be fine this year, but here's what I might suggest to you. Like, the recruiting challenge is not the recruiter's challenge. The recruiting challenge is everybody's challenge. And if you're a senior leader, you probably need to be steeped into what does it mean to recruit somebody into the military? And all of us has a role in this. If you're a leader and you're serving at one of our installations, do you know who your recruiters are? Do you know who your junior ROTC folks are? Do you know who your ROTC folks, your Civil Air Patrol? Have you been out to a VFW or an American Legion lately? So that we can all tackle this challenge that we have as it relates to recruiting. We have a lot of internal things that we're doing, and anything that is an Air Force policy, we are tackling all of those Air Force policies first on what are the things that are not helping us bring some things in. We actually had this discussion with the Secretary of Defense on Monday, in fact, and what we brought up to his level of attention are the things that OSD needs to do when it comes to some of the changes we need to make. We haven't modernized some of our accessions policies. If you have a peanut allergy and we find out about it before you enlist into the military, you're probably going to be gone. Or we've got to do a long, outdated waiver. That's a DoD policy. We're working on that. If you have asthma, all those things, we're taking a look at how we can get after those things. I will tell you, we're also going to have to balance the changes that we make, the Air Force policies that we make. We'll have to balance that with making sure that we are supporting a more modern force that's applicable to the 21st century, but not letting go of our high standards. And so that's that balance that our team is very carefully looking at to make sure that we get right. I'll tell you, we made a change, for instance, to the tattoo policy this past year, where we allowed airmen or recruits to come in if they had a 1-inch tattoo on their hand or if they had a 1-inch tattoo on the back of their neck. Some of the emails that I got, you would have thought that like the Air Force was going to hell in a handbasket. And here's again, this is good order and discipline. This is like we've got, to some degree, we have to have good order and discipline, and we have to appreciate military image, and we will, but I'm not recruiting 50-year-olds. Like, we've got to figure out how to modernize things. I'm sorry, nobody laughed, okay. But we've got to modernize while not taking away from our high standards, and those are the things that I hope that you trust the institution with. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Chief, this morning, Secretary Kendall had a message for us, and in that message, he mentioned that F4Gen does not apply to the mobility air forces. The crowd is wondering, have you been given any insights into what that something unique for mobility air forces might be, and can you elaborate on it in any way?
I cannot elaborate on anything about that, and here's why. Right, like I think we are still building out what some of that force presentation looks like, and I don't want to get premature, and I'm not necessarily the best person, but what I do know is that the folks that are making those decisions in the Pentagon are not doing it in a vacuum, and they are absolutely doing it with a lot of stakeholders within AMC, within the Guard, within the Reserve, to make sure that we figure out how do we present our forces in a way that makes sense.
Ma'am, with the record low promotion rates, how can we incentivize performance in other ways?
With the?
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry. With record low promotion rates, can we incentivize performance in other ways?
So a couple things on the record low. I hope we get out of the phase, and this is for the enlisted force, I hope that we get out of the phase of record low promotion rates probably within the next year or 2 years, but there were some levers that we had to pull, and I think it's important that everybody understands why. And I think I shared this same thing last year a bit, but we're still in that second year of lower promotion rates. But our enlisted force structure should really look like a pyramid, right? From E1 all the way to E9. But over the past few years, because we have record high retention rates, people, don't always believe the hype on what you see on the information space. We have record high retention rates. We don't look like a pyramid anymore. We look more like a muffin top. And so we have too many E5s, E6s, and E7s in our force. And so we had to address it. And when the A1 team came and brought that to me, what my first question is, what if we don't address it, and what if we maintain status quo and we don't change our record high promotion rates? The answer was, well, Chief, if you keep kicking the can down the road, then at some point, whoever replaces you or the person who replaces that person will promote 0 people. The Air Force that I came into 30 years ago, you couldn't even make E5. I don't know if some of y'all remember that. No matter how high you tested, you physically couldn't make E5 even if you scored hundreds. And so we never wanted to go to that place. And so we made some adjustments to those record lows. By the way, one of the things that you would hear from our force, by and large, if you asked the force about 2 or 3 years ago what some of our biggest challenges were, was that the Air Force doesn't value experience anymore. That's what we were hearing. And then when we pulled a lever to value experience, everybody said, but not when I'm testing. So that lever that we pulled, which is why the promotion rates are a little bit lower, and we did some more things to value experience by adding points, is really going to get us to a place where we start to have more experienced E5s and E6s and E7s. And so I think that that's important. Now, as far as the incentivizing piece, I've never been the best person to ask for that because, for me, it gets back to intrinsic motivation, right? Like, for me, it's been about, how do you get motivated in the job that you do? and stay motivated in it, and you're not looking at outward things to do that. You know, I guess I grew up old school where my mom told me, do your job and do it well. And so I would say, you know, that might be something that we need to, you know, every one of us internally needs to think about. The other thing that I will say, though, as it comes to people operations, and I started to talk about it earlier, where there's nothing that we're not going to look at when it comes to people. And if you look at the reoptimization LOEs that the secretaries pushed out, one of those LOEs is people. And in the people space, one of the things that we're looking at, and it kind of ties back into that Gen Z book that I was telling you about, is we have to have different ways to incentivize people to come into the military and to stay in the military, and that's about talent management. And so one of those things that we're looking at is how do we retain our technical expertise in our military? And so where 3 years ago, for instance, we might not have been talking about things like warrant officer, we are talking about them now. It doesn't mean that we're going that way, but we're, long pause. But I see y'all back there. Here's what I'll tell you. I think it absolutely has a lot of merit for us to very much consider that, because it's another pathway to be able to retain talent, and it's a model that's already out there. But we've got to do it smart. Every decision that we make has second and third order impacts, and we've got to do that. But I will assure you that we're looking at ways on how we retain our technical expertise. For the cyber folks in here, we are pushing very hard for a cyber pay. It's 2023, almost 2024. In the same way that we have aviation pay and jump pay, we need a cyber pay. And so those are some of the things the cyber people should have been like, yes, like, those are some of the things we're looking at. I have no idea what the question was, sir. I'm sorry. Okay.
You answered it,
Yeah.
Chief.
This is hard because the
Yes,
light
ma'am.
is right at us, and
Yes,
I can't
ma'am.
see. Okay.
And if you would rather stay over in the shade, you can,
Okay.
because I'll speak up.
Okay.
Can you?
It's still bad.
It's still getting you? I'm sorry, ma'am. Okay, so Chief, this is a little bit related to what you just said, so I hesitate to repeat the first part of the question because I think it's redundant, but the questioner said, I just saw that the Air Force raised its enlistment age to 42. Can we also raise high year tenure limits for those who want to keep serving?
Absolutely. And in fact, that is one of the things that we're looking at is what is the appropriate HYT for those who are serving now. Just, you know, I said we were going to have real talk. I probably shouldn't as much, but we're family. So when y'all think you read about stuff and find out about stuff online, me too. So here I am, and somebody sends me a link, and it says the Air Force raised its limits to 42. I said, we did? So anyway, it's not just you. But then somebody said that was in one of the emails that we sent you. You know what I mean? Keep them brief, people. Keep them brief. So the answer is yes, we are looking at all things. Everything people related. What is the HYT? What's the age limit? But we're being very thoughtful in what is the cause and effect if we raise those things. I absolutely think we need to, yeah.
Chief, the next question is, when this particular individual enlisted 20 years ago, tuition assistance was a max of $250 a credit hour. Tuition costs have increased over the years, yet tuition assistance limits have stayed in place. Is there anything that we can do to address that discrepancy?
So some of the things that we're looking at when it comes to TA is really working with the schools and the universities. In fact, we've got people that are calling and spending time with the universities to try to get them to lower some of their what they're charging for credit hours for the military member. The challenge that we have is if we raise our TA limits, there's an assertion that then the schools are also then going to raise their limit. When we compare how much the Air Force gives in TA and all the costs and education and by credit hour, et cetera, with the other services, I still think that our policies with TA are probably better than any other service in the DoD, right? Like, it can always be better, but that is at this time not anything that we're looking at, because if we raise those costs, that cost is going to come from somewhere. And somewhere, then we're going to have to figure out what are we lowering. And at the same time, we just raised our costs and how much we're pushing out for Air Force Cool, which is a good thing. that's going directly to our airmen with licensing and certification. So something will have to give, and for us, we think it's appropriate. But I will reach back out to the A1D team to find out where we are with the discussions with some of those universities.
Ma'am, I'm going to paraphrase this next question. It's regarding the potential of a government shutdown. And the questioner is wondering if military leaders are engaged on Capitol Hill to try to ensure that there is no loss of military pay during the shutdown. But if that is unsuccessful, are there other things we are doing to look at mitigating the impact on our individuals if there is a government shutdown?
Yeah, 100%. So very engaged on Capitol Hill and on all fronts, right? This is really a whole of nation. In fact, you know, when you look at even this past week, how much our secretary and our chief of staff has been engaged with our elected officials on the Hill with a whole lot of things. Government shutdown is absolutely one of those things. Even for myself, my engagement the last go around and making sure that we talk to members that actually have a vote to make sure that they understand this. That engagement is happening across the board, to include a lot of our VSOs who are actively engaged in supporting and representing every single one of you. When it comes to mitigations, you know, we'll push some of the talking points that we pushed out to all of the command teams as well as through social media. And I'm sure we'll have resources like financial institutions that are doing their part to try to be able to make sure that they can help when it comes to being able to, you know, compensate what your military pay might be with a zero cost loan. Those things will happen. Our Air Force Aid Society will be there. But I think one thing that I might ask your help with for you and for your wingmen is, I remember most of our parents always reminding us to save for a rainy day, right? I think it's important for all of us, if we haven't talked to our fellow airmen and made sure that they have like 6 months worth of monthly costs, right, saved up in a place, right, that it doesn't excuse the fact that we should never have a government shutdown. But that's uncontrollable, and that's something that we can't control. But what we can control is our ability to protect ourselves and have discussions with all of our wingmen. And so what I would ask is that all of our supervisors are having those discussions on, are you good? If you're not, then how do we help? And you've got first line supervisors there, you've got first sergeants, you have lots of resources. We don't want any airmen and their families to suffer in silence and not get the help and the support that they need, and there's many of those resources out there.
And Chief, this next question is related. And that is, and it just moved on me, I'm sorry, there we go. Can you share with us any initiatives that are being looked at by the Air Force to help families obtain more affordable child care?
So here's one of the things that I'd like y'all to know. Back in September, your Air Force pushed the Department of Defense to have a child care summit. Your Air Force did. Because we're not okay with the status quo when it comes to child care. Today, and just for a data point, we have about 18 to 20%, we have the ability to cover down on about 18 to 20% of child care across the force. And that's really because the modern military family has evolved a lot in the past 30 years. You have more single parents, you have more dual working parents, you have more dual military parents. And so here we are with a very different situation on all of our installations. Some of our installations have a hiring problem. Some of our installations don't have a hiring problem. They have a space problem. And some of our installations have both. And so this is where every one of our installation command teams is working very hard to figure out ways to get after whatever their issue might look like. And we've pushed out a lot of incentives to help incentivize hiring and push it to the lowest level. One of the things that the Air Force did specifically is, in order to get more child care providers, we're offering 100% free for your first child, for your child if you become a child care provider. And so you've got a child in the CDC, you're working there, that child's free. The Air Force also added some more benefits where we're also providing 25% for your additional children. if you'll come be a child care provider. I've seen where some of our bases are for FCC providers are providing bigger houses on base or an additional bedroom on base to encourage being an FCC provider. So lots of money are going toward incentives to try to increase child care. And that child care summit that the Department of Defense hosted is actually looking at how we might be able to get after this, but especially, and as I look at community partners, by reaching out to the communities and figuring out how we can help get after some solutions together with working with Boys and Girls Clubs and all those other things.
Chief, we've got time for one more question, if you please, ma'am. As you look back, as you look back on your career, can you talk about a significant struggle that you had to overcome or two, and the lessons that you took from overcoming those struggles?
How much time do we have?
Yes, ma'am, we've got time, so you just take as much time as you want.
Okay, I've got two. There's a lot, but I've got two. And here's what I've learned, that with every struggle or with every challenge, it's part of character building. And with every challenge comes opportunities. So personally, one of the struggles that I had to learn to overcome was making sure that I didn't get in my own way, right? Especially as a female leader, I grew up, right? I joined the Air Force over 30 years ago, so I didn't see a lot of female leaders, especially female chiefs. It wasn't until I was a tech sergeant that I found my first female chief, and I was downrange somewhere, and I went up to her and I said, I am so inspired by you. I don't even know why. She might not even be that great. But I was like, I'm just inspired by you because I finally saw. And so I never, for me personally, when I thought about strong leadership, I thought about people like my Army husband who's pretty strong and domineering. And when I learned that strength comes in different forms, as long as you're competent, credible, and committed, like any of us can be a great leader. And so when I got out of my own way and realized that I was a badass in my own right, then life was good. And so that was my first lesson that I had to learn, is to make sure that I'm not the reason why, that my own self-limiting beliefs weren't keeping me from going as far as I could go. Here's another challenge that probably all of us deal with, but here's a challenge that I dealt with since sitting in this position specifically. Learning how to navigate the information age. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like learning how to navigate this social media age. I'm going to talk about information age, and I'll try to tie it back to that question real quick, because I think it's important, right? I talk about a warfighting domain, information. Like all of us have to understand and appreciate that the information age isn't going anywhere. Whether you're on social media or not, right? Like it's a thing. And so I learned coming into this position how we've got to be very careful about what our eyes see and what we hear in this information age. In fact, I was probably a novice in the information age. I know y'all think the Chief Master in the Air Force is online all day. It's not. It's my PAs. But if it's ever a clapback, it is me, just so you know. But it's typically my PAs. And I'll never forget, they were like, Chief, when I first got in the seat, you have trolls on your site. I was like, trolls? What's a troll? Like, I didn't know, right? And he's like, you got swarms of them. And I'm like, swarms? Like, don't these people have jobs? And oh, by the way, he said they're all intel, to the intel person back there. And I said, oh, that checks. So, no, I'm joking. Hey, but we've had to learn how to deal with this information age. And I don't know that we've done it that great as a military, but we're getting there and we're getting better. I've been pushing really hard to make sure that people understand this information age that we're in. In fact, I wrote an article in the AU Press called A New Kind of War, because I think that it's important that everybody understands that if we lose an information, we could lose. He who gets the information out first will typically win, whether it's truth or not. And so I've had to learn how to navigate in this information age. And hopefully, even through our team, what we've tried to teach is that social media can be a great tool. We have to be focused on truth. We have to be focused on flattening cons. We have to be focused on the good. Hey, let me just talk about one thing my kids hate when I talk about this, but I think it's important to talk about TikTok. None of y'all do it because this is kind of the over 20 crowd, but the under 20 crowd, I'm going to quit saying that joke because none of y'all actually ever like that anymore, but the under, like your children, my children who are on TikTok all the time, like it's really important that we understand this information age that we're in. We need to know that, right, like most of us know that, okay, China created TikTok, no big deal. What most people don't know is that China created TikTok, but the version of TikTok that is used and employed in China is very different than the version of TikTok that is employed throughout the rest of the world. What most people also don't know is the version that Russia uses is very different too. And so the version of TikTok that is employed in China that they use is very focused on education, it's very focused on STEM, it's very focused on making a good human being. The version of TikTok that the rest of the world uses is really like hot garbage. It's cat videos. It's things that just keep you mindlessly scrolling. Why does all this matter, and why would I be talking about this? Because it's back to the long game, right? China put a stake in the ground, 2049, long game. They did a study on Chinese children and American children, and what do they want to be when they grow up? Chinese children want to be astronauts, scientists. What do American children want to be? Social media influencers. So if you think about the long game, what does that mean? And some of us used to laugh. It's actually not funny. What is that going to mean in 10 years from now? And so we've got to be focused on the long game, y'all. As I close it up, General Kelly, thank you so much. What I would say is that's probably the biggest challenge that I've dealt with is how do we navigate this and how do we get the Department of Defense to be a little bit more proactive in how we navigate this, because this is absolutely going to be a challenge that our nation has to deal with when it comes to our strategic competitors. And so bringing it back to what I was talking about earlier, like the only way that we're going to continue to be able to be our best, especially as an Air Force, is we need a whole of nation approach, a whole of society approach. And so what I will share with you as your senior leaders know that very well. Your senior leaders are very engaged from a whole of government perspective by talking with leaders, our elected leaders, by reaching out to our community partners to leverage our connections and our commitments with them, to talk to industry leaders to make sure that they understand their role as well, talking to school systems to figure out how do we get left so that we can grow fifth graders who are smart and ready to tackle all the challenges and opportunities that are going to come their way. If you need a really good book that speaks on whole of nation, I'd offer The Kill Chain by Christian Bros, one of the first books that we put on our reading list, a great book to talk about that, but it'll take a whole of nation. Until then, thank you for being the airmen and the leaders and the human beings that you are to make this Air Force so great. As we look to make changes and reoptimize our force, I'm going to ask your help in this. I'm going to ask your help in figuring out how can we reoptimize at the squadron level, at the flight level. How can we make our Air Force better so that we can continue being the Air Force our nation needs when called upon today, tomorrow, or anytime? Thank you to our mobility team for every single thing that you do. You are in the fight today. You'll be in the fight tomorrow. Make sure that you take care of yourselves. And on behalf of General Alvin, who wishes that he could be here, we salute you and we thank you for what you do. Thank you.
Chief, will you stay?